people on the internet. My name is Kobe, if you don't know already. Um, and this is kind of a general overview of the Tekin V280 software. This is mostly cited towards the RS Pro Black Edition. However, much of, if not all, of what I'll be going over will also be applicable to the RX-8. So I'm just gonna kind of go over some basic stuff as far as setup goes and what settings I like in my ESC. Of course, there's multiple ways to skin a cat, so whatever I say isn't absolute. As far as I prefer this, I prefer this. That's not the only way to go. But yeah, I figured I would go ahead and put out a general do and do not and how to, I guess, for tuning the Tekin ESCs on the V280 software. Since it is still fairly new, the hobby's always growing, and I'm sure that there's a lot of people that still don't quite understand how the new software works and what each setting itself does. So we'll kind of dive into some of that. I know that Mark Vine did a little section on Desert Hobbies show with Billy Shaw, where they had Jim Campbell on, and they kind of went over some settings generally, but time has advanced a lot since then, and as a racer who uses the V280 software, I figured I could kind of give a slightly different perspective towards all of the settings and different tuning mindsets. So we'll go ahead and jump into it. As soon as you load up the hotwire on your ESC and plug everything in, you'll immediately be guided to the dashboard page. Shows you all your general info on what you have in the car right now. As of right now, I have everything set to the default settings. So you can go to setup. This right here is your voltage cutoff. You can set the different cell counts you're running and everything. Obviously, you want to set it to 2 cell unless you're a dirty cheater. And then as far as your voltage cutoff goes, I know that a lot of people say to turn your voltage cutoff off. However, me personally, I'm not a big fan of turning it completely off. In the past, I did burn up an ESC because I was running bad batteries with really high IRs that weren't able to hold very much power. And I know that there's a lot of people that are still kind of getting educated on batteries and how they work and what they do. And when to start getting new batteries and buying new batteries. And I was running bad batteries. I turned my voltage cutoff all the way off because I was having issues with my voltage dipping below the voltage cutoff, and so my passes were slowing down a lot because it kept hitting voltage cutoff and going back up and hitting voltage cutoff and going back above it. So I'd say 6.4 is probably a little bit too high for drag racing, although technically you shouldn't really be dropping below 6.5 volts. I know some people say you should want to hover around 7 or so, but as long as you're above 6.5 volts, I say you're okay. But once you start getting below 6, you really start getting into the danger zone. So I say, drop it to about 3 volts per cell. That way you kind of have a good safety bin, and you can have a little bit of leeway if for some reason you are in a race for money or for a list or whatever you're doing, and you want to avoid your car dipping below the voltage cutoff and killing a pass. So I'd say set it around 3 or so. Don't go any lower than that. You have your BEC voltage right here, how much voltage is being output to the servo, how much voltage is being output to your receiver, actually. But in drag racing, we're really not running any LEDs or anything like that that'll be affected by BEC. So I usually leave mine at 6 volts. If you feel like turning yours up to 7 and 7.4, then more power to you. But right here you have your different motor types and different functions you're allowing. BR stands for brushed, and then BL stands for brushless, and then you have DL, FR, and FW. I know FR is forward and reverse. DL, I don't remember what the difference between DL and FW is, if I'm going to be honest. I'd leave it on BLDL though. because I believe this is just forward and brake. And then you have your reverse motor settings. And remember, if you do reverse your motor, the can timing in your motor is reversed. So if you have it set at 20, then that's actually 40, and so on and so forth. Right over here, we start getting to the good stuff with brakes and throttle, things like that. As far as braking goes, you don't want to turn your brakes up too much, considering if you do brake too hard on the top end, then you are susceptible to higher ASC temperatures, and you're also probably going to end up seeing some form of broken part on your car, whether it be axles, transmissions, things like that. I usually try and stay away from really high brake strengths. I think mine is set at about 80, but I really don't use my brake that much. I'd say if you can, try to set it a little bit lower, like closer to 50 or so, but each person's going to like different brake settings. The big one is drag brake. I leave mine around 20. Your brake strength can be pretty tunable. You can kind of just make sure you have it just in case you need a failsafe. But for the most part, as long as you have the room to do so, I'd recommend just letting your car glide to a stop at the top end. Push control brake minimum, I really don't mess with either of these. Then we get over to throttle. Neutral width is one that's tunable and can be important. Depends on what tree you're running on. If you're running instant green or flashlight start or anything like that, like a lot of races are, where you're just relying on pure raw reaction time, turn it all the way down to minimum. That gives you the least deadband possible, so that whenever you go to pull the trigger all the way, you're able to get as quick of a reaction out of your car as you can. If you're not doing an instant green race, it's pretty tunable, considering, on a pro tree, people are going to react differently to seeing the yellow lights. They're going to have different routines and everything. So, set it however you want to tune your reaction time. Reverse speed, most people don't run reverse, neither do I. Sorry about that notification. Most people don't run reverse, I don't either, so I'd recommend staying away from that setting. Then you get to launch boost, launch power, power delay, the big settings that were introduced in the V280 software. Launch boost I have messed with a little bit. It's an RPM based setting. It screws with your power delay some, although your power or your launch power does stay the same. So pull up Microsoft Paint real fast. So let's say you have your launch power and power delay set so that your graph looks like this. Then after you start messing with launch boost, your ramp might look more like this. So it's going to be significantly more aggressive, and on top of that, it's actually going to happen. You hitting 100% is actually going to happen sooner, and it'll happen a little bit differently every time. Like I said, I would recommend just sticking to these two settings, just like Ty Campbell and Jim Campbell have recommended. Maybe it'd be pretty good on a prep track or something like that, but if you're running no prep, even if you're running prep tires, things like that, I would stay away from that. But then you have your launch power. Your launch power and power delay actually correlate between each other. This is something that some people don't know. I think it's a very, very cool setting that they've introduced. So if you set your launch power at 30 and your power delay at, let's say, 0.96, then your car is going to start at 31 launch power, and after 0.96 seconds, your car will hit 100% throttle, and it will ramp up at a set rate. So sometimes people put settings in their car and they'll see so they'll see the ramp up to 30%, and then they'll see a small plateau like this, and then they'll see, the spike up to 100. So right here would be 100% throttle, and then it plateaus out from there, obviously. Sorry, that's not really a plateau. But I mean, it'll plateau out from there. And you can tune that ramp out of it with your launch power. If you lower the launch power more, then it'll have to start ramping up faster. Sometimes that'll get rid of it, either that, or you'll have to turn your power delay down some. I know some people do like that little flat spot being there. Like I know that, for instance, Mark Vine, I know some of you guys probably never heard of him. I know that he likes starting at about 65% power, so he'll start about right here. So he'll start at a very, very high launch power considering what some of us are running and I myself is running. And then it'll plateau out there for a while, and then it'll ramp up to 100, and then, flat out from there. And I know that with the M17, he also has the negative or positive slopes that he can add in, but just the general line is right there. And if you wanted to, you could technically tune something similar into your remote, although you're not going to, as far as I know, be able to limit it to something below 100%. So you'll have to, launch at 65 and then set your plateau up or set your delay up so that it's at 65 for however long you would like it to be there, and then have it ramp up to 100 from there. Another interesting thing is if you don't want to just get your numbers as small and as big as possible, you could start turning down your power delay more than usual, and then turn your launch power down. And if you do that, rather than seeing, something like this with a pretty long plateau, so that you make sure that, your car is hooking up the way you want it to and not spinning the tires or anything like that, you could go for a lower launch power and a shorter launch delay, so that instead of seeing, something with a flat spot like this that ramps up, you'll instead see something more like this. So you'll be starting from, rather than like 40% or something like that, instead you'll be starting at about 20%. And you'll hit your maximum power right here at, let's say, 0.5 seconds rather than maybe 0.9 seconds. So you're actually hitting 100% throttle faster, although your initial, bottom end of the track may be a little bit slower. And then you can try your best to tune your car to launch as fast as you can in this range, or, in this bottom part at least. So, you could do that with boost or any other settings you might have in your car, or in your remote even, although I usually try to stay away from tuning in my remote if I'm doing tuning in my ESC, as, one might throw another off. But yeah, I usually try and, stick with something along those lines. I like either setting up a middle to low end launch power, and then setting up my power delay to correlate to that and make sure it's as low as I can get it and have the car still hook up and, launch nicely and under control. Another thing to note is that sometimes your power delay and how it works may be affected by what remote you're running. At one point I was running a Futaba 3PV remote, and let's say at the time I was running around 40 launch power, and I would run that with about, let's say a 1.09 power delay, and my car would run, high 2 teens, low 220s, but one day my remote went out on me, and so I swapped to a 7PX, and the same exact tune that was previously running, high teens, low 20s, suddenly was running 2.7s. And this is something that I had seen a couple of other people post about at the time, and they were turning up their launch boost to 2 in order to counteract that. However, all that's really happening is your power delay is actually double what you're actually putting in. So instead of a 1.09, I was actually seeing a 2.18 power delay. So I'm now running about half of what power delay I actually put into it. So if I put in a 0.3 power delay, I'm actually seeing a 0.6 power delay. So if your car seems to be acting funny or anything like that, then be sure to double check your logs and make sure that your delay is acting properly. I don't know if it's something specific to just any higher dollar remote or if it's something specific to Futaba. Everybody that I've seen have this issue was running a Futaba remote. And I know that Futaba is a little bit finicky with some of the Tekin stuff, and as far as compatibility goes, I know that if you're calibrating your ESC, then it actually won't take the endpoints unless you reverse the throttle in the remote. So things may be thrown off a little bit, maybe something related to that. But like I said, having to double check your data logs is a very, very good thing that you should be doing anyway. It's always really good to pay a lot of attention to your data logs and see what's going on during your passes. So yeah, that's generally everything as far as the new V280 settings goes. If anybody has any questions, feel free to comment them or contact me on Facebook via Messenger, and I'll be happy to answer to the best of my abilities. Another thing that I've seen some people talk about is throttle frequency and throttle curves. And if you're doing any sort of tuning in your radio or anything like that, then these may have some sort of effect. Or if you're rolling into the throttle rather than just squeezing the trigger immediately, then they may have some sort of effect. But these two settings actually don't have any effect at all when you're drag racing and just pulling the throttle immediately. Me personally, I just max out the settings in my radio and do all the tuning in my ESC. And I recommend you do one or the other. If you don't want to take advantage of the V280, obviously you just max out your launch power and turn all of these off, or go to the 276 software even, and then from there you can just tune in your remote. I do like the V280 software a lot though. I haven't messed with remote tuning very much, but the V280 I've gotten to work really well, and I feel like my car has benefited quite a bit from it, especially compared to the old software. But yeah, it's pretty much everything that I have to cover as far as the throttle settings. Now we can get to the timing. As far as the timing goes, Tekin has these preset timing profiles, the 1 through 5. I haven't messed with any of these at all. I don't know what any of these settings are preset to. But the C1 and C2 are the primary ones that people will probably be messing with, and that you're probably messing with. These are the ones that I use. I've never messed with dual mode very much. I know a lot of people do when they're running RX-8s, but usually, a dual mode setup in an RX-8 benefits a lot from running a lower turn motor, because the dual mode and limited timing and everything, although it helps with voltage a little bit and temperatures and reliability, you are a good bit more limited as far as what kind of power you can put into the car through the ESC. A lot of people that are running anything like a 3.5 turn or 4 turn, anything like that on an RX-8 tend to compensate for the lack of timing with gear. Since you are only limited to 30 degrees, you can see, only 30 degrees max timing, turbo and timing advance combined. Timing advance is tuned in the same way that boost is, and then turbo is the same from one to the other. I like censored only mode. That's what I run with the RS4 Black. That is the big advantage of it, is having the censored only mode where you can, throw in a stupid amount of timing into the car. Although the big thing is you have to be careful whenever you're putting in the timing. I'll touch on that a little bit more in just a moment. You can't just throw timing in all willy-nilly, just doing whatever you want to do. It all has to have a reason to it, and you have to make sure that you are closely monitoring your voltage and your temperatures as well. Any of the low 2.0 or 1.9 passes that I have made have all been around or under 120 degrees in the ESC, about 100 degrees in the motor, and the lowest that my voltage will drop is about 6.7 volts. Like I said earlier, anything above 6.5 is pretty good, but if you're dropping below 6.5, then you either need to look into better batteries, or you need to double check and make sure that whatever tuning you're doing in the ESC isn't hurting the car rather than helping it. So, basic rundown, your boost is RPM based, your turbo is timing based. Boost maxes out at 60 degrees, I believe, or I guess it's 55. Turbo maxes out at 50. So you have these two settings. You can put in a max of 105 degrees in through the ESC, although most people probably aren't going to be running that much timing in it. It is pretty overkill having that amount being able to be dialed into the ESC. But the boost, however much you put in, is evenly divided up between your end and start RPM. So if you have let's say a start RPM of 20,000 and an end RPM of 50,000, and 30 degrees of boost being put in, Since you have a range of 30,000 RPMs and you're putting in 30 degrees of boost, you'll put in 1 degree of boost for every 1,000 RPM. And at the end of that RPM range, it doesn't all just come out of it. All of that timing stays in the car throughout the rest of the pass. So after you get above that 50,000 RPM, those 30 degrees of boost that you put in stay in for the rest of the pass. And any timing you put in with turbo or anything like that is just added on top of that. One thing to look out for, if your RPM range is too small, then you could end up running into issues with voltage dropping a lot, things like that. So again, always be sure to monitor what all is happening in your car throughout the pass. Data logs are very good for that. But I mean, if you continue to add timing and add timing and add timing, and it's doing nothing for the car, it's not picking up any time or anything like that, you should stop adding timing, take a second, look at your logs, look at your settings, make sure that there's nothing that's interfering with each other, and make sure that everything is being dialed in smoothly. Whenever you set up your end RPM, you put in whatever number you want to put in, calculate RPM, and then you'll hit, whatever number you want to put in, you click apply settings. As far as turbo goes, you have your, obviously your turbo amount, and you have your turbo ramp and your turbo delay. Your turbo delay starts after you hit full 100% PWM in the car. So if I have my turbo delay set to 0.4 and my power delay set to 0.5, then at 0.9 seconds, my turbo will start coming into the car. I know that initially there was a little bit of confusion about it, and it has been touched up on since, as to whether your power delay had anything to do with turbo delay, or if it was based off 100% throttle rather than 100% PWM. However, Jim Campbell said that it is and has always been 100% PWM. So be sure you're tuning with that. If you have a super high turbo delay, like let's say 1.5 second turbo delay and your throttle delay is 0.5, then you're not getting any turbo at all until 2 seconds into the pass. And at that point, your pass is pretty much nearing the end. But yeah, watch out for your turbo delay. I know that sometimes if you put in your turbo a little bit too early, it can cause the car to kick tires loose. So if you have your turbo set to come in around mid-track, then your car starts kicking the tires out or blowing tires off at mid-track, then there's a very good chance that it could be your turbo delay. A lot of the time when that happens, you can delay it another half a tenth or a tenth, and then it'll be able to take it. Your turbo ramp is the rate at which it adds timing to the car. So if you have a 3 ramp, then you're putting in 3 degrees for every half a tenth. So that means for every tenth, you're putting in 6 degrees of turbo. I know that some people have been confused as far as what this setting does, and I've seen a lot of people turn their ramp up to as high as like 8 or even 10. And at that point, you're putting in 20 degrees of timing for every tenth of a second. And at that point, you are likely killing your voltage. You could be building up really high ESC temps or even motor temps. So keep an eye on that. I wouldn't really go any higher than 5. And if you do, you decide to venture out into uncharted waters, just make sure that you're paying attention to what everything is doing. And I know that I sound like a broken record whenever I say it. But just be sure that as you add timing into the car and as you make changes, you're monitoring your data closely and making sure that whatever changes you make are for the better and they're not slowing the car down or anything. If you add more timing or you make a big change or anything like that and your car seems to fall off a cliff as far as ET goes or anything like that, then be sure to go back and double check all of your settings, make sure things are set up properly, and make sure that you're not just obliterating your voltage. That's one of the biggest things that I tell people about a lot, and it's to make sure that you baby your voltage the entire way down the track. Keep it above 6.5 volts. That'll leave your batteries fairly healthy, and make sure your ESC stays happy the entire pass, and your car will be a lot faster as well. Another thing I don't see a lot of people talk about a lot is in the RS for Black, since you do have 2 timing functions, it is possible to put both methods of timing in at the same time. So if your boost is being put in, until like 70,000 RPM, let's say, and your turbo is being, put in at like 0.9 seconds, like we have it set to right now, then at that point, whenever your car is starting to reach the limit of the delay and it's starting to actually dial in this turbo, make sure your boost is all put in, or vice versa. By the time all your turbos put in, you start putting your boost in. You don't want to start putting both of them in at the same time, because that can also cause your voltage to fall off, and it can cause your car to slow down quite a bit. So be sure that whenever you start adding timing in, add in your boost, figure out where you want your boost to be, and then start adding your turbo, and then fine tune from there. Make sure that whenever you're putting one in, you're not putting the other one at the same time. And if you are messing with your power delays or anything like that, be sure to adjust your turbo delay accordingly, so that whenever your turbo starts being put in, you're not overlapping with your boost range or anything. That's pretty much it as far as ESC settings go. One big thing I want to take a look at was data. So whenever you go to your data menu, obviously you click download, and then it'll load all of your data onto your ESC. I think I have some data on my car currently from some testing this weekend up in Tulsa. Yep, here we go. I'm not really sure what this is doing. I was testing some pretty crazy stuff on the car. So one thing you want to look at whenever you're done looking at your data, if you're done with it, you don't want to look at it anymore, you can click erase data and it'll get rid of all of it. If you hit export run data, then you can actually export it into an Excel file. So when you hit this, it'll ask you to name it. It'll ask you to name your file, and then you'll be able to send that through, and then you can open up Excel, open up that file in Excel, and then you'll actually be able to look at just all the numbers by themselves without the graph or anything. When you look at your graph, under these settings, it'll show you all the different settings that you can show. Initially, when you download the V280 software, your PWM and your battery graphs, which the battery is Ripple, your battery and PWM graphs will not be showing up. It'll just be these main 5 right here, so be sure to turn that on. And also be sure to save your settings once you're done with that. When you look at your graph, it'll show how many runs you have saved. Sometimes the runs will cut off while the ESC is on, if it hasn't gotten a signal in a long time or anything like that. And although most of the time you'll be able to make a pass and then bring it back and then turn it off, get your car ready for another pass, run it, and then, it'll log each of those times that the ESC was turned on and run separately. The highest number is the most recent pass, and that's the one that should pop up whenever you first pull up your data. When you go to display, you can change, colors of things, units, things like that. Make sure that you have your motor set to 2-pole. I know that the RS4 Black Edition comes preset to 2-pole, but if you are running an RX-8, it comes preset to 4-pole, I believe. So make sure you change that to 2-pole, or else your RPMs are not going to read correctly. Your resolution, make sure that whenever you're looking at your data, I know that sometimes it's really hard to read all these numbers and everything. You can change your position, playback speed, stuff like that. Make sure that whenever you're changing your position and everything, it's really hard to read these graphs sometimes. So you can change that to medium or medium high. The higher the resolution, the larger the graph. As you can see now, that graph that was beforehand really, really tiny is now quite a bit bigger. So another thing, when you go to your logging, your sample rate, I think in the V280 software it still comes preset at every 0.2 seconds. Make sure to change that to every 0.1 seconds. That way you can get as much of your data in there as possible. And then right here, I'll go over a little bit of data reading with you guys. As you can see right here, my throttle is never at 100%. You can see it reads 86.82% at the max. Your throttle percentage does not matter. It will not come in to bite you in the butt if your turbo isn't gonna not come in because your throttle doesn't hit 100%. I wouldn't stress too much about your throttle not being at 100%. Make sure your PWM is hitting 100, and as long as you have that, then nothing else really matters quite too much. Watch your ESC temps throughout passes. You can see on this pass, this right here is the end of it. And it's hitting 102 degrees at the max. And then right here, I am getting on the brakes a little bit. Shutdown was a little bit short, so you can see my ESC temps start to go up a little bit. Just make sure that you're being careful with braking, and also with back here your burnouts. As you can see, my ESC when I first turned it on was at 72 degrees, and then it spiked up quite a bit following the burnout. And these are fairly short burnouts too. I'd say try and stay away from doing any super long drawn force burnouts, and if you are doing things like that, make sure that you're not running, a super low turn motor or anything like that. And if you are, try and keep the ESC as cool as possible via whatever methods you have to, whether it's a lower gear, which also helps with voltage, or adding additional fans, which don't help all too much considering the time between, burnout and pass and everything isn't too long. Fans can still help a little bit, especially if you get high quality ones like Protec fans or WTF fans, then, that'll help quite a bit. But yeah, I like doing low RPM burnouts. I know that a lot of the time, whenever you're looking at recommendations from Jim and Ty Campbell, I know that they most of the time will say to do full throttle burnouts, especially shorter full throttle burnouts, especially if you have timing in your ESC. I haven't been doing that. We run sauce, so I like to do lower RPM burnouts for shorter periods of time. My ESC temps tend to stay pretty low. Just make sure that you're monitoring it. You don't want to be getting up into the range around like 180, 160, around there. Once you get up to that range, you start, getting a little bit into the danger zone. I think anything below 200 is technically okay, but I like to have some headroom. But as you can see right here, I start dragging my mouse across. You can see for each individual tenth, you can see what all of my settings are at, and where my PWM is, and where my RPM, what my RPM is doing throughout the entire pass. I like going through and reading all of this. You can see right here, something that I've noticed quite a bit is your voltage will drop quite a bit whenever you hit 100 PWM. This is the first tenth at 100 PWM. My voltage dips down to 6.6 volts, which is a little bit on the lower end. It's lower than I would like it to dip to. But then you can see pretty quickly after that it recovers 6.47. I was testing a few stupid things, so it dropped a little bit below what I would like it to be. But you can see on the top end it's recovering nicely, so my battery is doing perfectly fine. I'm not hitting it too hard at the tune or anything. And then you can see the RPM start to climb pretty nicely. Although right here you see the little dip in my RPM graph, and that's either it's spinning or hitting a bump or something, or not a bump. Either it hit a bump right here, or it was spinning this time, and then right here it hooked up, and then it was able to start developing some RPM. But usually you want it to be as linear as possible. You don't want your RPM graph to look, you don't want it to look like this the entire time. I know that some people, especially people that are running slippers, will see a lot of this, and then little spikes in between and stuff. I run a slipper eliminator personally, so that's why mine looks a little bit more linear. But you want it to look as much like this as possible, and if you do see it start to plateau or anything, then you may be able to go up on gear as long as your voltage is allowing it. You may also be able to start dropping in more timing, things like that. But I feel like that's pretty much as far as I wanted to cover as far as the tuning and data logging and everything and the Tekin ESCs go. So thank you everybody for tuning in. Again, if you have any questions or anything like that, I'll be glad to answer them in the comments, or if you message me directly on Facebook. Another thing, I will leave timestamps for each individual topic in the YouTube video. I'll be posting this on Facebook first, and then YouTube shortly after. And I'll leave the YouTube link somewhere. You should be able to find it by searching up, Tekin V280 software rundown or something along those lines. But yeah, that's all I have for you guys today. I hope all of y'all were able to learn something new, or at least, you were able to have some of your questions answered. But yeah, I hope that the rest of you guys have a wonderful day, and bye bye.